At exactly noon, on a bloody October day in AD 52, 19,000 condemned men lowered their weapons and waited for Emperor Claudius to keep his promise of mercy. Water splashed red against the burning ships. Exhausted fighters, criminals and war prisoners who had survived hours of naval combat stood knee-deep in the fake sea. Above them, the emperor's purple-covered seat cast its shadow. They had done everything perfectly. Morituri te salutent. Those who are about to die salute you. The ritual words had echoed across the flooded arena just hours earlier. Metal swords clattered into the red water, shields splashed down. The men had given Rome its show. Now they waited for their promised pardon. Imperial horns suddenly blasted through the arena. Not mercy, it was the call to keep fighting. Panic spread through 19,000 throats as Praetorian archers raised arrows along the arena's edge. The emperor's promise was just theater, another part of the show. Guards fired into the crowd of men who only moments ago believed they had earned life. There was no shore to swim to, no exits unblocked by spears, just entertainment in their final betrayal. But how did the most advanced civilization of its time turn honor killings into mass death as entertainment? Why did millions of Romans, even philosophers and priests, believe suffering was needed to keep society in order? To see how we reached this floating slaughterhouse, we must go back 3 centuries to a funeral where 3 pairs of slaves fought for a dead patriarch, unknowingly planting seeds that would grow into an empire's cruelty. The bronze sword scraped stone as the first gladiator in Roman history collapsed at a funeral. It was 264 BC, and Decimus Junius Brutus Scaeva had just created a tradition that would outlive Rome itself. His father lay on the funeral pyre, wrapped in fine cloth, surrounded by crying relatives. But Decimus had planned something new, what he called his munus, his duty to the dead. 6 slaves stood in a cleared space before the fire. Friends, men who had worked the same fields, eaten from the same pot, slept in the same quarters. Now they held strange swords, their farmhands shaking around military grips. "Fight," Decimus ordered. "Honor my father with your blood." The mourners shifted nervously. Human sacrifice was not Roman. That was what barbarians did. But this was not sacrifice, Decimus told them. This was different. This was sport, with meaning. The first pair circled each other. You could hear their breathing over the funeral songs. They were not fighters. They were farmers, given weapons. One slave, let's call him Marcus, kept looking at the funeral fire, then at his opponent, then at the guards holding spears. The choice was simple: fight your friend, or die anyway. But this was not murder. It was munus, a sacred duty. Marcus swung first, wild and desperate. His opponent, maybe his field partner from last season, tried to dodge but was too slow. Bronze met flesh. The crowd gasped, not in horror, but in something else, something new. Blood hit the ground as the first man fell. The second pair was pushed forward. The mourners leaned closer. The crying had stopped. Even the widow was watching now. By the end of the 3 matches, 3 men lay dead, and 3 stood panting, covered in the blood of their friends. Decimus nodded. His father's spirit had been well served. The survivors were freed, Decimus announced. The crowd murmured. Approval, justice and mercy, balanced perfectly. Beautiful, someone whispered. The Etruscans do something similar, but this has Roman dignity. What started with 6 men would later claim millions. The funeral guests left with strange energy. They had come to mourn, but left talking about the fights. Who showed courage? Who fought with skill with no training? When would the next funeral be? Within months, other nobles added fighters to their funerals. 1 pair first, then 2, then 3. The excuse was always religion, honoring the dead. But everyone knew the truth. They came for blood. One old senator wrote to his son, "Yesterday, I went to Quintus' funeral. The gladiator fights were disturbing, yet I can't stop thinking about them. There was something pure in their struggles, something real." His words spread through the elite like spilled wine. Munus gained new meaning. Not just duty to the dead, now it meant a gift of violence wrapped in religion. Within decades, private grief became public craving, and the word munus gained a meaning that shocked even those who invented it. The senator's words echoed in marble halls. Double the gladiators or lose the election. It was 216 BC, just 50 years after that first funeral fight. Gaius Aemilius Lepidus stood before the Senate, sweat running under his toga. He was not talking about war or trade or law. He was bargaining death as election strategy. 20 pairs, Lepidus demanded. My rival offers 15. The people expect more. The change had been quick. What started as funeral ritual had turned into political currency. Every Roman politician now understood votes could be bought with blood. But one ambitious official was about to change everything. Gaius Scribonius Curio had a problem. The year was 53 BC, and he wanted to be consul. His wealth was average, his military record, none. His solution would reshape Rome forever. I'll build something new, Curio told his advisors. 2 wooden theaters back to back. By day, plays on separate stages. But watch this, he waved his hands with excitement. They spin. The theaters turn on pivots and join into one great oval, an amphitheater for gladiators. His architect paled. The building will bankrupt me. I know, Curio smiled, but imagine 5,000 Romans watching 50 pairs of gladiators, not at a funeral, but just because. The Senate exploded in shock when Curio announced his games.
Madness, old Cato shouted. Fighting without religious purpose? It's sacrilege. Senator Publius stood slowly. Colleagues, the people love these contests. Why shouldn't the state give them what they want? Think of it as public welfare. The vote was unanimous. Democracy had just voted for mass murder. Within 10 years, every political career required blood. Aediles, praetors, consuls, each office came with an expected death toll. Julius Caesar, still young and ambitious, borrowed huge sums to provide 320 pairs of gladiators. His rivals whispered about bankruptcy. The crowd whispered about generosity. Did you hear? Citizens asked in the forums. Caesar's gladiators will have silver armor, pure silver. Did you hear? The math of ambition became grotesque. One historian calculated that reaching the consulship now required causing about 100 deaths. The Senate didn't talk about this openly. They talked about logistics, where to house gladiators, how to find prisoners, weapon quality standards. Marcus Tullius Cicero, the great orator and philosopher, wrote to a friend, I attended yesterday's games by young Pompey. 3 hours, 60 deaths. The crowd was thrilled. I fear what we are becoming. His friend wrote back, but you attended, didn't you? The state had found something darker than bread and circuses. They discovered that shared bloodshed created shared identity. When 50,000 Romans screamed together as a gladiator fell, they became one body, one will, easy to direct, easy to control. Soon, political success would be measured not by speeches or laws, but by body counts. The lion hadn't eaten in 8 days, exactly as the beastmasters planned. Deep under Rome's arenas, a new job had appeared. Bestiari. Not the fighters, but the keepers. Men who knew natural predators weren't cruel enough for Roman shows. They needed adjustment. Titus Flavius worked the cages for 20 years. He kept notes. Lions require 7 days of starvation for reliable aggression. Bears only 4. They are naturally angrier. Leopards are unpredictable. Sometimes they play with prey too long. The crowd gets bored. The science was exact. Too hungry, and animals grew weak. Not hungry enough, and they ignored the condemned. One disaster in 62 AD saw a well-fed lion lie down next to a Christian prisoner and sleep. The crowd rioted. The beastmaster was fed to his own animals the next day. But the prisoners had learned something the guards never expected. Word traveled through Rome's dungeons faster than plague. prisoners marked for damnatio ad bestias started countermeasures. Some starved themselves, hoping animals would find them too weak to bother. Others exercised, thinking fit prey might fight back. Marcus the thief had survived 3 years in the dungeons. He taught newcomers, they spray you with blood first. Animal blood makes you smell like food. But if you roll in your own waste first— "Does it work?" a young prisoner asked. Marcus showed his scars. "I'm still here." The beastmasters adapted. They began mixing oils with the blood spray. They tested different blends on slaves. They wrote charts of which scents triggered which animals. Science serving cruelty. One keeper's journal survived. Tried lamb's blood mixed with honey on subject 12. The bear's reaction was immediate and thorough. Recommend for future use. That's when they found the suicide in cell block 3. A guard discovered him at dawn. A prisoner had made a noose from his tunic. But this wasn't unusual. What disturbed the authorities was the note scratched into the wall with a stone. "I die Roman free." Suicide spread like fire among those sentenced to the beasts. The administration called it theft, stealing the crowd's entertainment. New rules appeared: round-the-clock watches, forced feeding, hands bound except during meals. The irony wasn't missed. Rome worked harder to keep prisoners alive than it did to feed its citizens. A guard named Quintus wrote to his wife, "Today I stopped a man from hanging himself. Tomorrow I'll watch him fed to bears. I don't sleep well anymore." But the most disturbing idea came from a suggestion box. Yes, they had those. A citizen proposed, why not use criminals' families as motivation? Promise a man his children will be spared if he provides good entertainment. The proposal was adopted within a week. A philosopher wrote about how far the rot had gone. 10,000 slaves spent 6 months digging what they thought was a reservoir. They were digging their own arena. Julius Caesar stood at the edge of the giant pit, his purple cloak blowing in the wind. The hole stretched wider than the Forum, deeper than a 3-story building. Engineers buzzed around with plans and numbers. "This will be my masterpiece," Caesar said. "Not of war, but of entertainment." "How many ships?" Caesar asked. 40, Imperator, 20 per side. "And men?" 4,000 prisoners, 2,000 per fleet. Caesar smiled. The Romans had seen gladiators, they had seen beast hunts, but they had never seen this, real naval war in the center of Rome. History itself as deadly theater. The prisoners knew nothing. They hauled dirt every day, told only that Caesar was building a new water supply. Some joked, "Finally, something useful from these hands."
Old Bryn laughed, his thick accent rough. He had been captured at Alesia, saw Vercingetorix's surrender. Now he dug. But Caesar had a special historical battle in mind. "We'll recreate Salamis," Caesar told his advisors. "Greeks versus Persians. The crowd knows the story. Now they will see it." "Which prisoners play which side?" someone asked. "Does it matter? They're all enemies of Rome." The preparation was careful. Historians were called in to make it accurate. Greek-styled triremes were built, only smaller. Persian ships, too, with their fancy designs. Costumes were ready. The condemned would die in character. 6 months of digging. Then came the aqueduct connection. The prisoners watched water pour into the pit, still not knowing why. Some cheered, thinking the job was finished. Surely freedom would come next. But when the water filled in, they understood. Bren stood in chains with hundreds of others as guards explained. They would board ships. They would fight. The last crew alive would live. Caesar's promise. "But I'm no sailor," one prisoner protested. A guard laughed. "You'll learn fast or die fast." The madness hit them like waves. Gauls playing Greeks, Germans playing Persians, all forced to act out a battle from centuries before,
just for Roman entertainment. History, as a death sentence. Training was short and cruel. How to row together, how to ram another ship, how to fight on a rocking deck. Several drowned during practice. The trainers shrugged, calling it acceptable losses. Caesar watched every session. He demanded details. The Persian ships must attack first. It had to be accurate. The Greeks would fake retreat, then turn, just like Salamis. Except here, every man would actually die. And this was only practice. The next emperor would make Caesar's lake look small. The day arrived. 40,000 Romans filled the stands around the artificial lake. Caesar's royal seat shone on the eastern shore, purple and gold blazing in the sun. The water was bright blue. It wouldn't stay that way. Horns blasted the start. 2 fleets rowed out, banners high, Greeks to the north, Persians to the south. 4,000 men who had never asked to be actors in Caesar's play. The crowd roared as the first ram smashed a ship. Wood broke, men screamed, bodies hit water. This was not imitation. This was real naval war with real death. The careful plan of Salamis collapsed into desperate survival. Bren, dressed as a Greek soldier, drove his spear into a Persian, his own cellmate. The man's shocked eyes, full of betrayal, would haunt him for the few hours he had left. By sunset, only 3 ships still floated, 200 men out of 4,000. Caesar, generous in victory, gave them all pardons. The crowd roared with praise. Such mercy, such justice. As slaves drained the lake that night, pulling hundreds of bodies from pink water, Caesar was already planning. Next time, he told his secretary, we need a permanent arena. This was just the beginning. The aqueduct ran for miles, not to bring life to Rome, but death to thousands. Augustus Caesar inherited his uncle's vision and turned it into permanence. Where Julius made a basin, Augustus built true infrastructure. His Naumachia wasn't just bigger, it was a permanent scar carved into the earth. The numbers were staggering. 1,800 feet long, 1,200 feet wide, a man-made lake that could hold 30 full-sized warships. But the real innovation was hidden. A whole aqueduct, the Aqua Alsietina, built only to flood this arena of death. Lead engineer Vitruvius wrote down everything. His design survived, showing math used for mass murder. Water flow calculated to fill the lake in 6 hours. Drains designed to remove bodies quickly. Viewing platforms built to prevent crowd crush when 200,000 Romans came. Engineers even calculated water pressure needed to drown men efficiently. The technical puzzles fascinated Rome's best minds. How deep should the water be? Deep enough for ships to fight, but shallow enough to pull out corpses. Vitruvians chose 12 feet, deep enough to drown, shallow enough for cleanup. But physics caused new problems. Ships needed ballast to stay steady. Stones were used, but condemned men dove down, holding the rocks to kill themselves. Solution? Sealed ballast compartments. Even suicide was designed away. The aqueduct's path worried some engineers. It crossed sacred groves, cemeteries, and private farms. Augustus brushed it off. The people need games, he said. Land was taken, graves moved, sacred trees cut. One farmer forced off his land, cursed the project. May every gallon carry blood instead of water. Workers laughed nervously. Within a year, his curse came true. But keeping the water clean was harder than expected. The first full-scale Naumachia under Augustus recreated Actium, his own victory over Antony and Cleopatra. 30 ships each side, 6,000 condemned men. The bitter joke? Many prisoners had fought at Actium for real, now forced to reenact their own defeat. After 3 hours of battle, a new problem appeared. Blood and corpses fouled the water so badly that ships could barely move.
The carefully planned battle turned into a slow massacre. Oars got stuck on floating bodies. The smell was so bad that people in the lower seats covered their faces. Augustus's engineers worked all night. By morning, they had installed a new system, underground pipes that brought in fresh water and drained the dirty water out. The machine of death had become smarter. A manual survived, listing the rules. Start fresh water flow after the first hour of fighting. Increase the flow as more people die. Drain and refill the lake between morning and afternoon shows. The system was ready. Now they needed stories to justify using it. The musician played his lyre beautifully. The bear didn't care. It was the Colosseum's grand opening in AD 80. Emperor Titus had promised shows beyond imagination. 50,000 people had already seen beast hunts and gladiator battles. Now came something new. Myth turned into death. The condemned man, a Greek prisoner named Alexios, was chosen for his skill with music. The irony wasn't lost on him. At home, he had played Orpheus's songs at weddings. Now he would die as Orpheus for Rome's amusement. They dressed him perfectly. A white robe, a golden lyre, a crown of leaves. From the emperor's seat, he looked like Orpheus himself had stepped into the arena. The crowd went silent as Alexios began to play. His fingers played the familiar songs, songs about love beating death, songs about music calming nature. Children in the stands knew the story. This wasn't how it was supposed to end. Little Marcus pulled his father's toga. "But father, Orpheus charms all animals. That's the story." His father shifted uneasily. Sometimes stories change. The bear walked out from a hidden gate. 400 pounds of hunger, trained and waiting. The crowd held its breath. In the myth, Orpheus's music tames the beast. It lies down, soothed by the melody. Alexios played louder, desperate, beautiful, begging the gods to listen. The bear paused, confused by the sound. For one heartbeat, story and reality matched. Then instinct won. The bear had been trained. Man plus arena equals food. It charged. Alexios kept playing until the very last second. Some witnesses swore the music still rang as claws tore flesh, though it was likely their imagination. What wasn't imagined was the snapping of strings mixed with screams. The sounds blended into one final, horrible harmony. But Marshall was taking notes, and his sarcasm cut deeper than any blade. The court poet sat in the noble seats, writing quickly on his wax tablet. By evening, his poem had spread among Rome's rich. Orpheus charmed all nature in the old tales, but in Caesar's arena the bear heard nothing. Perhaps our beasts are deafer than the myths, or perhaps our Orpheus was simply not good enough. The bit of joke hid a darker truth. Rome hadn't just killed a man, it had killed meaning itself. Every child who once loved the Orpheus story now had a new ending burned into memory. The sacred tales that taught values had become scripts for killing. If they could twist Orpheus, no story was safe, not even holy ones. The pitch-soaked cloth stuck to skin quickly. The victim became a living torch. Nero turned killing into art. The tunica molesta, the troublesome shirt, was his masterpiece of cruelty. Part punishment, part theater, pure horror disguised as justice. The process was exact. Prisoners were stripped. Wax was rubbed on their bodies. Then came the shirt, coarse fabric soaked in pitch, sulfur, and resin. The mix was designed to burn hot enough to kill, but slow enough to entertain. In Nero's gardens, tall poles had been set up at perfect intervals. Landscape designers made sure the spacing was just right. Too close, and the heat forced people back. Too far, and the effect was lost. Guards stuffed their noses to block the smell. Marcus Flavius served on the burning squad for 3 years before asking to leave. In his memoir, found centuries later, he wrote, "The worst part wasn't the burning. It was before, painting pitch on living flesh while they begged. Many guards drank heavily.
I asked for reassignment. The prisoners knew what was coming. In the cells, some tried to strangle themselves with their tunics. Guards took away all clothing, keeping them naked until the final moment. Even modesty became a weapon of control. One idea pleased Nero most: timing the fires at sunset. As daylight faded, human torches lit up his garden parties. Guests strolled between burning bodies, chatting about politics and poems, while screams filled the air. But one victim's words stayed with even the soldiers. Her name was Claudia, a Christian seamstress accused of insulting the Roman gods. As guards dressed her in the burning shirt, she spoke calmly. "You clothe me in fire, but you clothe yourselves in shame. My pain ends tonight. Your guilt burns forever." The young guard applying pitch, his name was Gaius, froze for a moment. His commander shouted. Gaius kept working, but his hands shook. That night, Claudia burned in Nero's garden. She never screamed. Not once. Within a week, Gaius disappeared. Some said he deserted. Others whispered he converted. His replacement found a note in the barracks. "I have painted my last innocent with pitch. Let Rome find other hands for its horrors." Tertullian watched Christians burn and wrote words that would outlive the empire. The Christian thinker stood among the crowd forced to watch his people die. But instead of despair, he felt clarity. He wrote that night, "The blood of martyrs is the seed of the church. Every torch Nero lights does not destroy us. It only lights his darkness. Rome thinks it ends us. Instead, it spreads a fire it cannot stop, the fire of truth against tyranny." His words proved true. Each burning created witnesses. Some people were scared into silence, but others asked questions. Why did these Christians die so calmly?
What faith could survive such pain? The show that was meant to scare people became proof of belief. Nero had turned killing into a message, though he never knew it. The burning shirts that were supposed to crush a movement instead made sure it lived on. Rome's greatest moral teacher left the arena feeling worse, more cruel, less human. Lucius Annaeus Seneca, the Stoic philosopher, advisor to emperors, the conscience of Rome, had been there. Not at the big, fancy games with a fake lair of honor, but at the noon executions, the midday entertainment, which was nothing but raw slaughter. That evening, he wrote to his friend Lucilius, his hand shaking a little as stylus touched wax. "I stopped by at midday, expecting sport, wit, and relaxation. It was the opposite. The morning's combat was merciful compared to this. At noon, it was just butchery." The noon spot was reserved for the Noxii, criminals with no training, no real weapons, and no hope. They were shoved into the arena in groups, handed rusty blades, and ordered to kill each other. The winner of each fight then faced another doomed man. It went on until none were left. "The spectators demand that those who just killed must be thrown to those who are about to kill," Seneca wrote. "The winner is only kept alive for another slaughter. The only exit is death." He kept going back, even as he admitted his own shame. This was Seneca's private weakness. His mind told him the games were wrong. He even wrote against them. Yet when the horn sounded, his feet carried him to the amphitheater. "I come home more greedy, more ambitious, more lustful, more cruel, more inhuman," he confessed. His honesty was cutting. Rome's brightest mind admitted that watching state-approved murder infected him like a disease. But Seneca noticed something even darker than his own failure. He watched the crowd, not wild mobs, but ordinary Romans, mothers with kids, merchants, priests, teachers, leaning forward when the killing began. "You can see the guilt on their faces after," he wrote. "Yet they return, we all return." His students read those words while buying their own tickets. The hypocrisy spread through Rome's educated people like philosophy itself. They studied Seneca's letters in the morning, then cheered at deaths in the afternoon. One student, Lucan, wrote to him, "Master, I memorized your letter about the games being corrupting. I quoted it at dinner last night. Everyone agreed. Then we all went to see the gladiators. What's wrong with us?" Seneca's reply survived. What's wrong is that we've turned vice into virtue, cruelty into bravery, murder into morality. We've flipped every value we claim to believe, and we've done it so completely that even when we see it, nothing changes. But Seneca's warnings were drowned out by a mob finding its true hunger. Christians sang hymns as the fire climbed their bodies. It only made the crowd angrier. The persecution of Christians had shifted from politics to public shows. What started as crushing a dangerous cult turned into plays where faith itself was the fuel. In AD 64, after Rome's Great Fire, Nero needed scapegoats. Christians were perfect, mysterious enough to scare, peaceful enough to capture, common enough to kill in numbers. But something happened that Rome didn't expect. When they killed Christians in groups, the victims refused to follow the script. Ordinary criminals cursed, begged, and fought. Audiences liked the drama of defiance turning into despair, ending in death. Christians broke that pattern. They prayed for the men killing them. They sang. They smiled. One angry announcer even shouted, "These Christians don't entertain properly. They die like they're going somewhere better." The calmer they died, the more brutal the methods became. If burning didn't work, they tried beasts. If beasts failed, they tried crucifixion, drowning, flaying. Rome's execution designers worked non-stop trying to squeeze terror out of victims who refused to play along. But every new attempt backfired. A young woman named Perpetua left a diary kept by other Christians. The night before her execution, she wrote, "Tomorrow I fight beasts in the arena, but I've already won. They can kill this body. It's temporary. My real life begins at death." She walked into the arena holding her baby daughter, gave the child to another Christian in the stands, and spread her arms wide to face the leopards. The crowd expected panic from a mother. Instead, they saw calm strength. Many left disturbed. Her final act even converted the man who killed her. Blandina, a slave girl from Gaul, faced horrors that made trained soldiers vomit. She was burned with hot irons, mauled by beasts, and tied to a stake. Through all of it, she kept repeating, "I am a Christian. We do nothing wrong." The soldier told to finish her was a veteran named Taurus. He had killed hundreds. Blandina looked at him, blood running from wounds everywhere, and said, "You look tired, friend. This burden is heavy. I forgive you. My God loves you." Taurus froze. He had been called monster, demon, bastard, but never friend. Never forgiven. His sword wavered. The strike that should have been clean went wide. It took him 3 tries. That night, Taurus vanished into the Christian underground. His note was simple. "She called me friend while I killed her. What God teaches such love?" All of this built toward one emperor's ultimate show, one that would finally push things too far. Below the arena sand, 200 men worked with pulleys and pipes. They never saw the deaths they caused. The Colosseum's hypogeum was Rome's greatest piece of engineering, not for what it showed, but for what it hid. Beneath the killing floor lay a maze of tunnels, cages, and machines, an underground city made only to deliver death. Slaves lived in half-darkness, running the elevators that lifted beasts into the light. They pulled the ropes that raised stage sets. They controlled pipes that could flood the arena for naval battles. They were the unseen crew of slaughter. Marcus Quintus
ran Section 7 for 5 years. His logbook survived. Tuesday, Elevator 3 jammed with lion halfway up. Beast angry, lost 2 men pulling it free. Wednesday, blood dripping down from above ruined the gears. Asked for fresh sand, request denied. Too expensive.
The workers made their own culture. They never talked about what happened above. They only called it the performance. Of course, they knew. Everyone knew. But keeping distance helped them forget. One engineer realized his flooding system had trapped men below. It happened during a test flood for a coming Naumachia. Gaius Maximus, the chief water engineer, started his masterpiece, pipes that could fill the arena in just 2 hours. Water rushed through the channels, valves opened in order. The arena began to turn into a lake. Then screaming came from Section 12. 20 slaves in the animal cages had no warning. Water burst through the drains and filled the narrow hall. The exit doors closed automatically during floods. Gaius heard fists pounding on the bronze doors. Their cries grew more desperate as the water rose. "Release the seals," he shouted. "Can't," his assistant said. "It would drain the arena. The emperor reviews tomorrow." Gaius ran to the manual controls. His boss stopped him. 20 slaves or disgrace before Caesar. Which do you choose? The pounding stopped after 10 minutes. The test was called a success. That night, Gaius secretly added emergency latches inside the halls. His boss had them removed. "It weakens the water seal," he wrote. Then came the emperor's special order: flood during the fight. The command came straight from Claudius. For his grand Naumachia, the water should rise while the battle went on. Naval combat would become a race against drowning. The engineers looked at each other. Possible, yes, but never done. The system was meant for empty arenas, not for 19,000 men inside. "What about those who can't swim?" one asked. The messenger shrugged. "That's the point." Everything was ready for Claudius's Naumachia. 19,000 men were about to learn that even perfect obedience could not save them. The horns echoed over the water. The men realized their promised pardons were lies. Claudius stood in his box, purple robe shining in the sun. His voice carried over the sea. "You have entertained Rome well, but now the show needs a worthy finale. Resume combat. Die gloriously. This is my mercy, a death with meaning instead of plain execution." The betrayal spread through the fleets like the waves they made. These were not fresh men. They were tired fighters who had already given Rome hours of battle. They had believed survival was possible if they followed the rules, if they did their part, if they died the right way. A Dacian prisoner named Decebalus threw down his sword. "We already fought. We saluted. We did everything." The Praetorian archers answered with arrows, not to kill, just to wound, to force them to keep fighting. The message was clear: fight or be shot to pieces. What followed was not battle. It was planned murder. Exhausted men swung their swords with heavy arms. Ships rammed without order, only desperate to finish faster. The water, already pink, turned red. Some men tried to swim to shore. Soldiers with spears stood waiting, pushing them back. Others dove deep, choosing drowning over the fight. Guards in small boats forced them back up with poles. A Greek prisoner used his last strength for defiance. He climbed a mast and shouted, "Romans, you watch us die for fun, but we are men. We had families. We had names. I am Theron of Athens, and I die calling you all murderers." An arrow struck him mid-sentence. He fell into water thick with bodies. The crowd finally cheered. At last, some passion in the act. By sunset, none of the 19,000 lived. Claudius had kept his promise, in the cruelest way. His mercy was death. He called the games magnificent. Historians recorded them as a triumph of Roman shows, but something had changed. Even the mob was quiet leaving the arena. They had seen great deaths before,
but never betrayal this huge, never hope crushed so completely. Parents carried sleeping children past drains running red, slaves pulled bodies from poisoned water. Senator Cassius wrote that night, "I've seen games for 40 years. Today was different. We didn't watch men die, we watched Rome's soul drown. The appetite grows with feeding, but what happens when nothing satisfies?" His question was answered within decades. The games went on. Each emperor tried to outdo the last, until bread and circuses could no longer cover empty treasuries, enemy invasions, and collapse from inside. Rome fell, but not before teaching history a lasting lesson. This is the endpoint of entertainment without conscience. Today, we shake our heads at Roman cruelty while binge-watching violence. We turn tragedy into content, consuming pain through screens instead of arenas. The medium changed, the hunger didn't. Seneca's words still echo. Every time we enjoy suffering as entertainment, we grow more cruel and inhuman. We just don't see it, because our arena is digital. Our guilt spread through clicks and views instead of cheers. The 19,000 who died in Claudius's Nomachia believed civilization meant rules, mercy, order. They learned too late that when entertainment is worth more than humanity, even perfect obedience cannot save you. Their bodies were burned in mass pits outside Rome. No names, no graves, just a number in an emperor's report. Claudius provided exceptional games. 19,000 lives reduced to one line, but their silent warning still lingers. The change from citizen to spectator, from empathy to appetite, from human to consumer, happens one bloody show at a time, until the day comes when you realize too late, you're not in the seats, you're in the sand.